Buenos dias, bonjour, and welcome to Zoomcatchers Behind the Screen. I'm Kimberly Gunn, Executive Director here at Zoomcatchers and creator of the Behind the Screen series. I am so happy today to be continuing with our Writers series. We featured Mario Montoya, Jimmy Santiago Baga, and also the Hell California Crime Anthology Writers team. Today, I am so pleased to welcome Antonio Salazar-Hobson, trial and labor attorney, human rights commissioner, advocate, husband, father, author, and so much more. He'll be reading today from his new memoir, Antonio, We Know You.
Well, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. I am so pleased to talk about my brand new memoir called Antonio, We Know You. The title of my book comes from a comment that Cesar Chavez made to me. I met him first when I was 15 years old, and at 18, I needed a special favor, which he was ultimately able to provide. I'd like to start by saying that I am very, very grateful for Jimmy Santiago Baca, who's written the foreword. His expression of faith in my book and the quality of my memoir has meant the world to me, and it's made me be able to sort of go forward and finish this piece. Um, as a background, I mean, let me just say that I've been a Chicano lawyer now for 35 years for unions. In addition, I have represented tribes from California tribes to the Sioux Nation for 25 years. And what this book is going to show you is going to show you my resilience that is sweeping in scope and is really meant to into a saga of the challenges that were actually met. And although my memoir must begin at my kidnapping at age 4.5 by a white pedophile couple, this is not this is not the essence of that story. There's a saga of my lost child to farm worker. There are many saviors whom I met along the way who enabled me to get an education. And then there's my actual lengthy labor and tribal career where I was able to represent and advocate for my people. I need to just add at the very end here that there are two reasons why I wrote the book. The first is that I wanted to give a legacy to my silent Salazar family, just like other people of color's families who have been silenced. And secondly, I wanted to provide a guide, a book of hope for abused children, so they too could be reassured that they could find a way to love. So that's the essence of my book.
Great. Thank you so much, Antonio, for being here. Want to just show the cover and the beautiful artwork. Antonio, we know you. So, Antonio, I'd love for you to start off, bring us both here. Hello. Start off with a piece that'll set the tone for our conversation.
Okay. Well, I do have, one initial cheery piece that begins at the very start of my book. And I think it's a piece in which so many of us will recognize and Latino people. So let me start with this. Um, my earliest memory is a happy one. This recollection became the touchstone of my life, leading me back to Petra and the love she taught me. I was around 2.5 years old, far too young to help my family in the fields. We were roused from the bed, usually shared by 5 of us in the wee hours of the morning. I struggled to entangle myself from the reassuring warmth of my siblings' bodies. We had bathed the night before, so the older siblings just simply had to clothe themselves and to clothe the younger babies. We ate breakfast in what appeared to be an enormous kitchen. My father and my brothers had covered the raw concrete floors with a beautiful flowered pink linoleum. The kitchen to me appeared enormous with a full-size stove and fridge. And this is where my sustaining memory began. The miracle of the breakfast burrito line under the loving eyes of my mother, Petra. Petra normally dressed like all the other farm worker women in the morning. wearing khaki pants and long-sleeve shirts and a large-brimmed straw hat upon her head. Except for these, except for the hat, these were clothes with the clothes that Petra wore while serving us our breakfast. To me, my mother was at her most beautiful in the morning hours. Petra was small, maybe 5 foot 2 inches tall, with a womanly body that by then had given birth to 12 children, with two more in the way. Petra had been married since the age of 13, chosen by my father to raise his then 3-year-old son Roman. She had a broad face with high cheekbones, dark brown eyes, a ready smile, and an effortless embrace that reached my heart when she hugged me. Of course, she was the mother to us all, but to me, as the family's mute child, she was tireless in her affection, and her embraces and kisses were like desperately needed oxygen for my soul to breathe. Kindness came naturally to Petra, and it would be these 4 short years that I spent with her when she taught me to love. Although I have thousands and thousands of images of my family with the Salazars, it is this pre-dawn scene, the image I could return to as a touchstone. This is why I was never broken.
Thank you so much, Antonio, for setting the tone for our conversation and for being here today. We've spent the last several couple of weeks and months discussing your story. I've been able to read various passages, and I'm a fan already. So thank you. Thank you so much. But I do
Yeah.
want to start to have you, go deeper into your story. You did state in your
Yes.
your introduction that your story is one of hope and resilience, but it is defined by early childhood sex abuse and you being sexually trafficked here in the state of California. I was wondering if you could just give our audience more details about your early childhood.
Well, I mean, the tragic circumstances of my story, of course, begins with my kidnap by this white pedophile couple who had befriended my family. But that's not the true saga that defines my book. There are so many things that happen beyond that. There's a saga of my life from lost child to farm worker. There's a saga of my life of the many, many saviors who helped me along the way, both with my education and how to find my family. And finally, there's the saga of my lengthy labor and tribal career and how I tried to always help my own people. Now, I do obviously need to refer, I think, to the abduction, and I think that would give your readers an image of how quickly that occurred.
Okay. So we have Antonio Salazar-Hobson reading from his new memoir, soon to be released. Let's show this beautiful cover. Antonio, we know you. Take it away, Antonio.
All right. So the abduction. It was early part of February 1960. A full month had passed since I had seen the Hobsons. During that time, various older brothers and sisters were given direct responsibility to make sure that the Hobsons were not allowed to take me from our home. But the Hobsons came from me. They arrived silently in the late afternoon. They drove into the alley behind our unit. Our back screen door had been left unlocked. I was in the living room and I heard the door. First Sarah, then John insisted that I open the door to speak with them. Just open the door, Tony. I, I initially refused because I was aware of the new rules imposed by my family regarding them. After much insistent imploring, I stepped outside onto the back porch, staying 6 to 8 feet away from the car. I approached no further until John, who was driving with Sarah in the passenger seat, emerged from the car and opened the back door. John just stood there and told me that we were going for an ice cream run and that I needed to come to the ice cream parlor. John also told me to bring my sister Virginia, 3 years older than me, but I hesitated. John took a few steps towards me and ordered me directly and with false patience to get into the back of their car. Virginia must have overheard the Hobsons, and she rushed the back door to intervene. John quickly grabbed me and threw me in the car and then reached for Virginia to put her in the car as well. My brother Rudy, then 9 years old, had been placed in charge of watching the other younger children and me that morning. He rushed to the Hobsons' car and threw open the door, grabbing my sister from the rear passenger seat. I was completely on the other side of their vehicle, and Rudy could not reach me before the Hobsons tore off with me. As soon as we sped off, I realized without any doubt that the visit to the ice cream parlor was a lie. I knew something terrible had happened to me and my family, but I could not comprehend what that meant at the moment. I recall weeping silently in the back seat, which seemed for the first time that neither John or Sarah screamed at me to stop. I learned to cry silently at the farmhouse for the shock and torture that they had previously embarked upon. But I, but I recall that on our overnight trip, we seemed to drive endlessly without stopping. Sarah had carefully packed snacks for all of us. The Hobsons already had a trunk filled with suitcases and personal possessions. I only had the clothes on my back. But I do know I wore the black tennis shoes they had purchased for me months earlier, a crushing, soul-searing image of the event that would forever shape my life. And that's how I was taken, very quickly, and never to see my family for decades.
Hmm. Hmm. In talking to you and doing, my own preparation for this episode, I was really touched by the fact that you have been able to overcome such an unbelievable trauma and tragedy in your early childhood life. And I was wondering if you could lay out how you decided to write this memoir. Some people, they suffer abuse and they're not able to move forward. But what compelled you to pick up the pen and take this, your story to writing?
Well, uh, first of all, I spent my entire life looking for my family. It was a very, very long journey. You know, a lot of it very hard, and a lot of it, fulfilled with friends who were loyal to me. And but I spent 20 years looking for them, and I ultimately succeeded. And I realized that it would take me decades to see if I could ever have the wherewithal to talk about what happened to me. I was very quiet with my own family as to about what had happened to me because I did not want to be rejected. And so, after many years of therapy, quite frankly, and many years of a successful career, and recognizing that I had a superior education, that I was the one who was capable of writing this legacy, and that it was important that it not be hidden, and that it was important that it become part of our history, and that abused children learn from it, and that our broad community learn from this experience about what happened. And so that galvanized me. And so, that's how it came about. And I'm very pleased that it's now finished for all to see.
Yes, and I want to congratulate you a million times for, first having the courage to actually take your story to the paper. I know for many people it's a very therapeutic process, and to actually
Mhm.
now see it coming into fruition is such a great leap forward for you personally and for other
Right.
writers of similar types of stories.
And
Just
I
a
also and I also think that it's a great leap forward for my own family. I mean, they now have this story. They now know that their legacy has been established. They now have great pride in me, I mean, they've had great pride in me since the moment I left. But I mean, this has been transformative to my family, and I'm very honored that this has occurred. So,
Great. I wanted to move into the topic of talking about your family, the Salazars, and what they meant to you. I know that just in our conversations and reading various passages from the memoir, that you were able to draw on the love from your mother and the longing to reconnect with your family. And I was wondering if you could
mhm.
speak more to that.
Sure. I mean, you realize I was taken when I was 4.5 years old, and I was kept in isolation for about 3 years as I was trying to cope. I did not speak a single word of English, and and I desperately needed to reconnect with my family. And so, I found a way that ultimately worked for me. And because I needed to find solace, I needed to find daily solace to relieve the pain, and I was able to do so. And so I'd like to read this story, which is called California Burial Grounds, and it's very intimate. It's one of the most important stories in my book, and it helped define my strength as I went forward. Uh, until the moment that I was able to reconcile. So I certainly hope you enjoy it and see the power in these images. So it's called California Burial Grounds, and this is the first California. They moved to an adobe house that was surrounded by 10 acres of of orange trees, and I lived in an isolated environment for those 3 years. So So this is how it starts. The most visceral memory I have at the adobe house begins at my favorite orange tree. It was old growth, a mighty tree to me, with an unusually large canopy. I used my canopy to make my own private room away from the Hobsons. It was a place where they never came to visit me, to my great contentment. The Hobsons did not disturb me while I was under the tree, other than to call my name into the house. The Hobsons had immediately stopped using my real name of Antonio and only exclusively used my new name of Tony. They knew I was 30 feet away from the house, and my spending countless hours away from them each day made them very content. Instead, they used my refuge to provide them a way to keep away from me. I sought solace, not knowing what to do, but finding my heart and my mind turned towards anything that might help me get in touch with my family. I would sit under the orange tree, and eventually I came up with an idea that I would that of collecting the spare and broken adobe bricks alongside my home to place under my tree. The adobe bricks were heavily weathered after decades of exposure, old and crumbling. I used these bricks in a way that absorbed most of my attention for the entire 2+ year period I lived in the orange grove. I started to form my own collection of abandoned bricks into an arrangement that symbolized each member of my family. As I began to bury the bricks near the trunk of the orange tree, I always trusted that I was totally hidden by the tree's canopy, even though I was actually visible to someone approaching the tree. I missed my family so intensely that I wanted to have a way to regularly visit and to talk to them, to let them know I was still alive, that I missed them, and I would be coming back. And as I began to build what eventually formed in my head as a burial yard, the inspiration to do so came from some unknown place and quickly took over my imagination. It provided an immense balm to my desperate child's mind, and a bruised but never lost identity with a terribly damaged psyche. I made sure that I had enough bricks for each family member, 13 siblings and both parents. I laid them out without names since I did not read Spanish or write English. I made holes in the ground deep enough to hold each thick brick. I ritually buried them each day by placing them in their graves, using 1 to 2 inches of earth down upon each one and ending the day. I initially buried them in a very haphazard pattern. When I returned to the tree the next day, I began the process all over again. It was deeply reassuring to me and quickly developed into a compulsion. I could never halt this cycle of burial and reburial. Only the rain brought a temporary halt to my burying. I had a natural love for the rain, a change of weather that I also found calming and cleansing. I knew that the rain was not a good time to work on my burial grounds, but I nonetheless realized that none of my bricks would be washed away. As my burial imagination evolved, I realized that I needed to organize the actual burial ground a little better. Suddenly it became clear to me that my brothers needed to be buried as a group, and my sisters needed to be buried in their own group, with my parents each having their own place. I was psychologically compelled to engage in the burial of my family every day, a ritual that both soothed and connected me daily to the lost Salazar family. Once I realized the need for a better reorganization, I experienced an unexpected calmness in my mind. I was no longer so overcome with my daily anxiety about the placement for each of my family members. I went along with a burial ground for Bether at the top of my family, only grudgingly giving my despised father Zeus a place next to her. I knew that I had no choice but to do so. I never told the Hobsons about my burial ground, my daily unearthing and reburial, or that I talked with my family through these adobe bricks. It was not until we left the adobe house to move into a house in an isolated olive orchard that I was forced or able to end these efforts. I never repeated the burial grounds for my family after we moved. I missed my burial grounds, but I found out about our move a few days' notice. I used the extra time to make sure my burial grounds would be safe when I left. I believed I had taken care of my family, and I willed myself to endure until the time I could return to them. I never considered a burial space for myself, for I believed I would soon be returning to the loving arms of Petra. So that is how, at an early age, I connected to my family, and that was the defining cornerstone uh, that kept me going in my young life.
I remember reading that passage and even reading some of the other passages. And I wanted to talk to you now about your writing style because you have such a great attention to detail. And for me, it felt like you were kind of cataloging everything that was going on as if it were a crime scene, so to speak.
Mhm.
Have you been able to draw on your legal background for your writing and that sense of attention to detail?
Well, yes, I mean, I've been a full-time federal litigator for 35 years, which has required, a great deal of writing. But, this is entirely a different style. And, you know, this is about a very intimate and absolutely truthful story. This is every image, and I have hundreds more of what happened. And I really tried to actually scale down, um, some of the worst things that occurred. I just said, go with the truth, go exactly with the ample memory you have, and write it down. And so this is what came from my heart. It was in many ways fairly easy to write, aside from the emotional, pain of getting through it. But it was cleansing. It was reaffirming, and I became a stronger person for it. And I was proud that my family became a stronger family because of these stories. I'm also very grateful that my family knew uh, my story so intimately. My family broke up within 10 days of my abduction. And that was one of the most shattering pieces of reality that I found out when I returned. My brother who took care of me on the day of my abduction, was put into reform school for 9 years. My sister was sent to reform school within 8 days. My mother, Petra, was thrown out of the house in 10 days, never to return, but obligated to provide meals for 7 years to her family, just to be left on the porch of her husband's house. Uh, and the family shattered. So, when they came back and they had looked for me for years, there was such a great sense of happiness and pleasure. And the other thing is that they recognized me instantly as their sibling. I looked just like my father. I have the same color as my father. I have the same smile. I have the same gait and the same walk. And so, it was just clear that I was their lost brother. And so that removed any doubt. And and of course, I came to them, speaking, both languages. And I identify as a working class person, always have. So the reentry uh, became much easier than I ever imagined. And the most important thing was that I was able to see Petra before she died and to show her what her son had become in her name. So that was key to me.
I remember reading that passage where you reunited with Petra, your mother, and I was touched by a couple of things. One of them was you were expressing a concern about being rejected,
Yeah.
and how you immediately were overwhelmed with a sense of just the opposite. You were welcomed, and you knew that your mother, loved you. Can you speak about that feeling of a rejection that you initially thought would be what would happen?
Well, I mean, I was profoundly worried that my family, even possibly my mother, Petra, who was monolingual, um, would see me as some Chicano who had sold out to become a white boy, anglicized, and had utterly lost his connection to his people. And I'd spent years of my life, for lack of a better term, creating my street creds, both as a farm worker, both 5 years in the factory, both as a union organizer, then a union attorney, and then taking on many Latino cases. And so, uh, you know, nonetheless, I felt that maybe I hadn't done enough, and I I was confident somewhere that my mother, no matter what, would love me. But I didn't get it that she didn't need anything else other than to have me show up and speak Spanish. And when in the moment of our first embrace, it was really clear that she was the same woman with the same smile and the same embrace, and I was the same boy. And and so, my family predominantly followed her lead. I met all my family and my siblings the following day, and and since that time, I've been with them for 38 years. But it certainly took me a while with a couple of my male siblings to prove that I was honest enough and genuine enough. But once they heard my true story and how I grew up in poverty and what I did and my work with Cesar Chavez, my picking fruit, and you know, it all resonated with them, and they found out that I was one of them. So that's how it worked out. Years of worry, years of trying to be good enough, and then full acceptance. So it was pretty astounding.
Mhm. And I think that's really at the heart of your story. It obviously is filled with childhood trauma, tragedy that we wouldn't wish on our worst enemies, but it's
Mhm.
also punctuated with family reunification
Yeah,
and your quest for your family.
yeah.
And I
And I'd like to emphasize, I knew at the onset that I could not talk with them about the abuse. I just knew that that would be a bridge too far, and that I needed to spend decades with them before I would ever mention something like that. And I think that was the right move. They now know, and they're very supportive. But you know, uh, you know, I tell you, the first time I met my mother and we realized we were fluent in Spanish was astounding. The first time I met all my sisters, and they knew that I could speak flawlessly with them in the kitchen. Uh, it made my road, easier, and and to get the acceptance of my brother, particularly my lead brother Rudy, uh, who had just spent 14 years in a maximum security prison, and who led my brothers. You know, uh, it was good, and he became my best friend for 30 years thereafter. So, I became to rely on them, and I would often call them, or they would call me every morning to check in, to exchange prayers. We were very close, and you know, it didn't have to be like that, but it was in my family, and we have a lot of Chicano pride and a lot of dignity, and a lot of that is in the book now. So,
I did want to ask you about your name and you obviously held on to the belief that you'd reunite with your family,
mhm,
and you have the Salazar-Hobson name. What
mhm.
led you to decide to keep the Hobson name in your legal name, given
Sure,
everything that happened?
sure. My legal name is Antonio Salazar y Bailon, and all my family, has the E Bailon in their family with the same parents. All right. When I was adopted, quote unquote, because that's the euphemism they used for kidnapping me and raping me, uh, was, they said that I could only be called Tony Hobson. And that was terrifying enough. And then my school records began to show the name Antonio S. Hobson. And then my college records started to show all of them, both undergraduate, graduate, and law, started to show the name Antonio Salazar hyphen Hobson. And so my first appearance in court was to go into court and change my name because I refused to be addressed as Mr. Hobson. And I added the hyphen. It's the only name like it in the entire world, and it's consistent with my educational records. And and had I, had to do it again, I would have purged it entirely. But it was very difficult for me to carry on with my career with my accreditations under a different name. So you know, that's that's how it worked.
Mhm, mhm.
So,
So I do want to show just some of the pictures of the motel that you were in at that time. And if you can just reiterate some of the details. I know that you were kidnapped from Phoenix and the Hobsons were familiar to your family?
yes, that's correct. The Hobsons were neighbors to my family in the projects in Arizona for 6 months, and they befriended my family through various ways of grooming them to make sure that they were trusted. The Hobsons moved to a separate house. When they moved to a separate house, they invited me to their home, and that was the first incident. I was 4 years old when I was raped, and what happened is I became again a fully mute child because I had regained the ability to speak earlier and remained in that condition for a couple of years. They took me, as it says in the previous scene, approximately 2 months later in front of my family. And, uh, and I was sent to California the next night and was used as a trafficked child for 7 years and never returned to Arizona until I was able to return to my family. And of course, the Hobsons were never prosecuted. Had I been a white child, I'm confident that that the police in Phoenix would have looked much more harder for me, since we were a poor Mexican family and we were monolingual. Though there was a 2-year search, allegedly, it was probably grossly inadequate, and they gave up. And so, you know, John and Sarah lived with complete impunity that entire period and died without any charges brought against them.
That was, one of the questions that I had was, did the Hobsons have to face the law? And was justice ever served?
No, they never had to face the law for a second. There's one interesting aside. My school principal for 3 years, who had adopted 10 children, had asked my family, the Hobsons, whether he could adopt me as his 11th child. And for 3 years, my family there, the Hobsons, entertained it for about a week in front of me, as if it were a viable idea. But then they told me, as they were talking, both drinking and smoking heavily, that they were afraid to appear in front of someone called a judge. Now, I have no idea at the time what that meant. Now, obviously, as an attorney, I do. They would have been prosecuted, they would have been arrested that night, and they would be in prison. So, they were very cautious, with their movements. And you'll find out later that I went to a ranch that was also completely protected and isolated from any police review, with no risk of exposure.
These issues obviously still resonate in our communities even today.
Yeah.
There isn't a week that goes by where a child hasn't been abducted or a violent act has been committed.
Yeah.
And I know that through our conversations and reading your material, you talked and leaned heavily on your faith, and you also had people that came into your life that you call saviors. And I was wondering
Yes.
if you could touch on some of those people.
Okay, I will. And so, first of all, I had many saviors. Uh, as I was growing up, I was lucky enough to encounter uh, approximately 3 Chicano families uh, with whom I was able to identify immediately. There was the Mexican chicken farm, and I met all the workers, spoke Spanish, and realized that I had found home again. I was 6 to 7 years old. There was a Mexican family I found at the ranch, a Mexican cowboy and his spouse, who made me real food and spoke Spanish and made me feel good. And I was there for 2 years, and they protected me in many ways. They were not there, for the third summer when even worse things occurred. Uh, I had kind teachers. I had a kind principal. I had people who I didn't realize inadvertently saw that I might be a bright person, and that I might make it, uh, despite my own fear that would not be the case. I had a drive to be the best that I could be, at the same time hiding from whence I came with the Hobsons. And um, and then there was Cesar Chavez at 15, and I began to spend years with him at that time. What he did for me as a favor at 18 is seminal in my book and allowed me to finish my education. It's a really big deal what he allowed me to do. And then I had people like Dr. Norman Brown, UC Santa Cruz, who was one of the 3 great intellectual minds of the 70s, who saved all my scholarships, and guided my education for 5 years until I won a Danforth for my performance. I was getting a degree in Latin America. So, and then throughout the labor movement, I've met friends, uh, both rank and file, stewards, leaders of the movement, lawyers of the movement, who have all seen that I deeply believe in solidarity and will not budge when it comes to defending a union and its members. And so that gave me an enormous leg up, and it showed me the example of how they worked. Uh, and and then that doesn't include the most important person in my life, which is my wife, Catherine, whom I've been married with as of January of this year, 40 years, and been with her for 43, who's been my stalwart advocate and companion this entire period, and has believed so deeply in this book. And of course, there are my children who've given me strength, and of course, my faith as well. So, I didn't do this on my own, uh, you know, and I followed through with the experiences I felt that I needed to do. You know, I picked 4 seasons in Central Valley and in Salinas. I worked in factories for 5 years. I identified as a working class person. I stayed close to my people. I didn't. There was no light between us. I only wanted to be Chicano, and those values made it easier for me to survive. With the help of the saviors along the way. So,
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. We're here with Antonio Salazar-Hobson,
yeah,
reading
yeah,
from his up and coming, soon to be released memoir, Antonio, We Know
yeah,
You. I
yeah.
was wondering if you could continue and read another passage in this
Yes,
compelling
I
news
would.
story.
Yes, I'd love to. One passage I think would be useful and important to readers is about Cesar Chavez and the special favor he did for me that utterly changed my life. And so let me read that to you, okay? And and it's very important because the title of my book comes from a comment that he made about me when I was 18 years old. All right, all right. So it says, I met with Cesar Chavez in Stockton before another of his UFW rallies. Cesar was surrounded of his by a few of his members, maybe 5 to 6 farm workers. Cesar seemed relaxed and happy to see me again. I was nervous. All I could think about was that I needed to ask him as quickly as possible whether I could work for the Pacific Coast producers. I briefly began with my recent successes and told him how important it was to finish college. He seemed to quickly agree, but then I informed him that I was without funds and I had no way to make it through my junior year. Cesar paused, as if he knew I had an important question to ask. I was in front of his other workers, realizing that there was no other opportunity for a private moment to speak with him and ask him about my core problem. I, I tried to calm down, to handle my questions with dignity, and to not fall apart in front of him. I reminded him that in Lodi, the PCP cannery plant was the most important plant with over 2,000 employees, seasonal. I told him that I was going into my junior year completely broke, without any hope of savings for the coming year. And then I asked him whether I could join the Teamsters, the enemies of the UFW, so I could secure enough money to finish my education. I had no idea at the time what he would say or what he would think of me once I made this request. I steeled myself for the full range of potential reactions. I knew that once he said no, I would fully comply, and I told him that immediately. Cesar looked quizzically at me with his eyes, and also with a great deal of affection. This was the last response I had imagined. He said in front of the other men gathered there, Antonio, we know you. He was so quietly enthusiastic with me, completely unperturbed by my question. He seemed pleased at my deference and that I was willing to accept any decision that he might make. Cesar said that the UFW would continue to be my family, and that he knew that I would continue to fight for La Causa. In that dramatic yet matter-of-fact moment, my future ability to financially survive, to complete my education, was in the balance. Cesar told me to go ahead and sign up for work at PCP and to use the money I earned to finish my school. I was astounded. I had never anticipated a positive answer. Cesar, after knowing me for 3 years, had in fact full confidence in my loyalty. I continued to work in numerous UFW activities as an undergraduate, all the while grateful for his acceptance of my circumstances. Cesar's permission and his faith in me was one of the most affirming events in my life. I was a struggling young man who wanted to stay loyal to my people and to become an educated advocate on their behalf. I know with certainty that but for Cesar's kindness and belief in me, I would not have achieved my educational goals and career. This one moment defined my future and allowed me to continue my relationship with Cesar for the next 20 years. So this was a very, very important moment. I mean, I was deeply afraid of what he would say. I had virtually no other alternatives, and and it was difficult for me to raise this question. I had just worked um, my fourth season in Salinas on the only UFW ranch, picking strawberries on my knees for 4 months. This was during the 1973 Salinas lettuce strike, and he was aware of my successes in organizing out there. This occurred right after that, and so I was grateful that he knew me well enough, and that he had the generosity to do what he did, and that I had the courage to ask him and to follow whatever he said would be appropriate.
Yes, that's for me, that was just one of the key themes in your story. There's several, but one of them that really stands out for me is just at the time when you need it the most, this savior appears that really transforms your life and takes you into a whole new level as far as your
Yeah.
professional work. You also mentioned the gay cowboy who basically saved you from that horrific experience as well. Now, in particular, with that experience, did that shape you to pursue work with the LBGT community?
Yes, I mean, you know, the most important thing is that on the third summer, my Mexican family was not there, and there was a new cowboy. He was a gay cowboy from San Francisco, whom initially I didn't trust, but seemed to have zero sexual interest in me, and was a very, very kind person. And what happened is that at the very last assault in the third summer, when I had given up hope, he intervened and had the assaults stopped. And he was from San Francisco. And but for his intervention, I don't know what would have happened. And it led me to a long-held faith in the LGBT community. I want you to know that John Hobson, as an aside, was gay, and that did not really affect my assessment of gay people in any way. It just didn't. Uh, he was a pedophile, period, and that's what defined him. But I was able to, as a union person, win the first transgender rights for the Service Employees International Union in the nation, if not in the country. Uh, I was really pleased to do that. I sat on the Human Rights Commission for the City and County of San Francisco under Willie Brown, where I managed all LGBT rights for 7 years, including contracts which violated uh, the conditions that our people deserved. I continued through various rallies over 30 years to be supportive. To me, they have. I'm proud to be affiliated with them. I consider them natural allies, and anything which I can do to further my understanding, to be part of their struggle, along with the other struggles that I join into. That's what I've done. That's what I'm prepared to continue to do. So, and I'd also like to say that what was seminal in my transformation to Judaism was I represented the first uh, gay rabbi in the United States, and his name is Rabbi Bennett, and he appears in the book. And I, you know, I'm an employment attorney, so I handle employment contracts from virtually every other sector, including rabbis. And so I handled his case, and I've developed a 35-year relationship with him. And he was key to me, guiding my faith, showing me the possibilities, and ultimately bringing me closer to Judaism, for which I'm very grateful for. So many, many allies along the way, and I'm grateful for all of them.
Mhm. And so you were able to work with Cesar Chavez for 20 some odd years?
Yes, yes. Cesar Chavez for 20 years, Dolores Huerta for over 30 years, doing political campaigns uh, in California. Many, many, many of them. And I'll tell you my best story about her. She came into a campaign office, and what you do is that you're supposed to be there to make phone calls, and you have a staff sort of wondering what they really need to do. She came in, said hello to people, and for the next 6 hours, got on the phone in the next 20 seconds and just made phone calls. And that's who she is, a humble, brilliant, brilliant leader who leads by examples. And I've had that privilege of watching her do that kind of work for such a long period.
Great. I just have a follow-up question about your work in the labor movement. What do you see as the trajectory, going forward for people in the labor movement?
Well, I think that we've suffered a heavy reduction uh, in the labor movement. Right now, my main union has gone down from approximately 1.4 million to the 800,000. It's a telecommunications union. I think what's needed is a broad labor movement. I think you're seeing this more in the COVID crisis. I think you're seeing it uh, more in the sense that people need to find ways to secure higher wages. I think this new generation sees the benefits of, uh, of becoming part of a union. I think we're sort of out of options. The best thing about being a union is that you have someone to represent you and to collectively bargain on your behalf. That you're not one person against the employer. And remember, we have millions and millions and millions of members in this country. We just need to encourage them to become part of this, to continue to organize the very, very strong women's movement within the labor movement. We have many prominent leaders who are women, uh, who have shown fantastic vision. We need to build on those, and also on people of color who've been leaders. I'm confident. I'm not depressed about it. I know that there is a crisis point emerging, and I think that we will rise to it. And I think unionization will be a large part of it.
Great. You heard it right here, everybody, on Zoom Catchers Behind the Screen. Antonio weighing in on the future of labor.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
I was wondering if we could continue to talk about people who influenced you and who served as saviors. You have so many professional successes, a labor and trial
Mhm.
attorney, human rights commissioner, now an author. And I know
Yeah,
that you were influenced by Jimmy Santiago Baca. I was wondering if you could
yeah.
speak more about that.
Well, I mean, Jimmy Santiago Vaca is one of the most astonishing individuals on the planet. who is magnificently talented and and was kind enough to take an interest in my book. It's really quite happenstance how we met, but it's an interesting story. Um, a tribal client of mine reached out to him, one whom I had been very successful with in New Mexico, and let him know about me. And Jimmy said, don't have him call me, have him read my first book, which was in this case A Place to Stand. And within the first 12 pages is a passage about Florence Prison, a maximum security prison in Arizona. Well, at the very same time that he was in prison, three of my brothers were in the same prison. And it felt like such a bolt of lightning that here was a brother, a cosmic bolt of lightning, that had written about an experience that my own brothers shared. And all of a sudden, it became clear that this was a natural ally, that this is someone whom I needed to work with if I could have the honor to do so. And so we connected, and we saw that commonality. And when I met with him for the first time, uh, after about an hour, I showed him some pictures, and with the pictures of the Hobsons with me as a child, and the pictures of my meeting with my family, the very first time with my siblings and others. And and he said something to me. He became very close to emotional for about 50 seconds. And he said to me finally, and I didn't know the importance of it. He says, we're not going to let them do this to you anymore, Antonio. And we're not going to let them do this to us anymore. That was it. That was it. Hecho. Final. That was it, brother. And it was those words that gave me the faith to say, you need to go ahead and write it, Antonio. Go do it now. And I thank him eternally for that insight. And so and he's been a big part of my cheering squad with this work. So
And he's also written the foreword to the memoir, correct?
yes, he's written a forward, very very kind. It's not something which he often does. I think it's an expression of his belief in terms of the value of the book, the number of the diverse audience it will attract, the fact that it's overall a memoir of hope and resilience, that it's not limited to an initial sad story of an abduction, but it's in fact a story of Chicano life, pride by someone, and also an example that abused children can use. So, I've had, I talk with Jimmy every week, and and that's one of the greatest privileges I have, and and I'm pleased to have that privilege with him.
Great. Jimmy is, there's no one like him. We've had him on our
Yeah,
show and our Behind the Screen, and
yeah,
he has a heart of gold. And
yeah, he certainly does.
he
So,
recognizes great writing talent. So
well, we'll see.
it's already off to auspicious beginning. So shall we
Yes,
say?
yes. Thank you so much.
You are so
And
welcome.
and 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 then I didn't know whether you wanted uh, to to discuss my issue of faith at all, because it was important in the end of sort of holding me together in this book. Um, so, but I would just say that faith provided me the coherency to believe that I was survived, that I was meant to survive, and that I had many gifts to be grateful for. So,
Great. Perfect. And, you know, as we've stated throughout this conversation, your story obviously is defined by the tragedies that happened to your childhood, but
yeah.
it's also about hope, resilience, family, recovery. I remember you mentioned you were in therapy for 20 years to survey the
Yeah.
damage.
Mhm.
And What advice do you have for people who might be in a similar situation? They've had to endure childhood traumas or adult traumas. What can you
Well,
say to
I think,
them?
okay, my first advice is always believe yourself. Never doubt yourself. Always believe what you experience. Never decide that what you went through was insignificant. It does not matter whether it was an unwanted touch on the knee and nothing else happened. If you considered it abuse, it was abuse. If it becomes something much more serious, then of course that's something we all seriously regret, and many of us have lived through. But there's no sort of value in saying he was abused more than I was. That's ridiculous. You know, I think the other thing is to tell young people and even their relatives who have not been involved with the abuse and their teachers that they need to reach out and call people. The first thing they need to do is call their teachers more than anything else because they are trained to help with this. Teachers and counselors and policemen. And if the first person doesn't tell the true story, tell another one. Tell another one until you reach someone. And then they will file a report and an investigation will take place. And what you as a child and a young person will forget is that you have much more power over the abuser. You have the ability to ruin their lives, the rest of their lives, and they know that. And so do not be hesitant and, um, and get this off your shoulders as much as you can. With regard to therapy, it's very difficult. If you're lucky, you can get some counseling in high school. If you're lucky, maybe you can get some support groups with your teachers. I understand that most of us as the Chicano people cannot afford therapy. I was one of the rare ones who could, and it made a big difference. But there are support groups for people out there, and we should use them. I know it's very difficult, in particular, for women to use therapy or to make use of support groups, mostly because of the control of their men and also because the use of therapy is discouraged. I also know that we as Chicano and Latino men generally refuse to do it based on cultural reasons. And we have to stop that. We have to say that we have to find a way to heal, whether it be through men's groups or what have you. Um, but we start and we end by telling young people, pick up the phone, tell your teachers, and keep going until somebody really knows, and it'll be taken off your hands. And and for me, I just wish it had been more of an option for me, which it wasn't. So yeah.
And thank you so much for sharing those words because I know for so many people, they carry a sense of shame and it can be
Mhm.
a burden. And
Mhm.
we're going to include some resources at the end of this program for people to reach out. And we, Zoom Catchers, and I know Antonio as well, we want people to know that help is available
Mhm.
and you don't have to go through this alone.
Sure. And I would just like to add to anyone who suffered this at whatever level, this has never been your fault. There is nothing you did to deserve this. You have to really get that. And some some abused people say that they think there's something they did to provoke it. That has to be lost as quickly as you can through the help of your teachers or what have you. And it wasn't because you were a bad kid. It was because your relative was a pedophile, your neighbor was a pedophile, uh, and uh, and so to the extent that we can break through that guilt level and just say it's not about you, it's about what they did, and you go forward. This is the one clear thing you can do. Um, you know, that's a big barrier which has to be removed, I think.
I agree, and I know the words will reach, many people who will watch this who may have personally experienced these types of
Yeah,
traumas, or maybe they know people, or maybe they
yeah.
want to just help their community in general. So we'll have that information at the end of our show. And
And then I guess I would also add is that if you're an adult and you recognize that there's something going wrong with a child and you can't tell what it is, right? Don't try to lead the child in saying a certain thing, but go listen to that child. Tell them you really, really care, that you'd like to find out, that they can use their own words and take the time that they need, but that you're here to be trusted and you will help them. Show them the patience to listen and be consistent. If you sense something is wrong, something is wrong. So do something about it.
thank you. I know those words will resonate with people. And as a survivor, I call you a thriver. I know that you
Thank
speak
you.
from deep experience on this topic.
Yeah, yeah. So,
What I wanted to do before we move into our final chapter of this truly engaging conversation, I just want to highlight some pictures. Once again, we are with Antonio Salazar-Hobson, and he is the author of the soon to be released memoir, Antonio, We
mhm.
Know You. And it's coming out March 2022, correct?
Yes, in both English and in Spanish.
Perfecto. That's all I
Mhm.
know. And then I have some other pictures here. Just wanted to make sure that we included them in our discussion. So just tell us briefly, what is this photo? It's El Rancho
Okay,
Motel.
this is a picture of the El Rancho Motel located on the frontage road of Stockton, California. It was the cheapest hotel for 20 miles either way on Highway 99. I spent 4 years here in a room that was well under 200 square feet. It cost $3.50 a night. It it only had two types of guests. It had long haul truckers and prostitutes. And this is where I lived during the entire time that I was in high school. John and Sarah were both full-time nightly alcoholics, and quite frankly, it was a nightmare with Sarah becoming agoraphobic and all of those things. So this is the small room that I had. No one ever came to my door in the 4 years. They just came to the frontage road, and and within that room, I just had to live and survive with two crazed people. And thank goodness I had a Mexican family behind the motel who I befriended and took me picking for 3 seasons and allowed me to sort of get away from the nightmare of that room.
Unbelievable. And we have some more photos. These are some happier times with Antonio and music.
Yeah.
Tell us about your music.
Yes. No. I'm a musician. I've always felt that deeply. I played guitar for close to 10 years. One of the things which I enjoyed most was playing with other people. Here I'm playing at a wedding, in this case, classical music. I At my university, UC Santa Cruz, I was a member of Los Mexicas, a folklore group for 2 years, where I both danced and also played for them. And this was my first couple of years of college when I had my first hints of freedom, and it was a precious time for me. And so that's what I was doing here. Now, this is a much more recent picture of my brother. I had I had a beautiful picture of my brothers on the day that I returned, and there were many more of them there. Uh, and most of my brothers here, many of my brothers here have died. Uh, two of them here have died. Here, this would be Mandito in the middle, and then my favorite brother Rudy in the red shirt, and the fellow in the white in the gray uh, shirt with the black jacket is having severe COVID complications 8 months later and can barely breathe. And it's been a rough time. But on this occasion, we'd gotten together for dinner, had a great barbecue, and we were getting ready to sing. So it was a good evening for us.
Great. So glad that, despite the obvious tragedies in your life, you've had
Yeah,
amazing moments of kindness and joy and success with your
yeah,
career. I
yeah.
did want to talk briefly with you about the the loss that your family has experienced due to COVID. Unfortunately, our country reached a very tragic milestone this week of 700,000 fellow Americans who've lost their life. And I know that you've written about this in your memoir as well.
Sure. I mean, I just like to remind people that under President Trump, he refused to close the borders for the state of Arizona, and that the governor of Arizona followed uh, along with Trump for many, many months, and that the neighborhood where my family lived in Marysville, Phoenix, was once rated for 3 days the worst place in the world for COVID infections. All right, so that's how it starts. So let me read briefly a short story about them that sort of summarizes, what occurred last year and this year, and it's called Faith. And it says, from June to the first week in August 2020, I lost three of my siblings, Helen, Stella, and Rudy. Mando died in April 2021. These recent deaths mean that I have lost Petra, two sisters, and six brothers from a family I tried so hard to find. I could look at their deaths as just more tragedies in a life filled with great pain. Let me explain why this is not my choice. This is a personal explanation, although I am aware of our world's terrible sufferings through famine and flood and war that provides perspective on any individual's life. I'm often asked whether I believe in God, a divine presence by whatever name you choose, that is greater than all of us. Do not confuse me with someone who believes he was placed on this earth to serve a particular God and is guided by him for every move. This is the most distant of images and does not apply to me. I had no name for the faith that came to me at age 10, in the months after my attempted suicide. At 9, I had tried to take my life by hanging myself in the shower after my last rape at the ranch, where I had been sent for a third summer to live with my predators. As I wondered over and over why I survived, in seconds, inexplicably, a belief in a divine presence came to me. In that instance, I knew that there was a sacred power, and I accepted this gift with its unknown potential. I believe that as I do now, that this divine presence broke the shower pipe, thus saving my life. This divine presence provided that my life should not be over at age 9, and that there would be a more promising fate for me. I reached my faith despite John and Sarah's continuous themes of aggressive atheism. I had little knowledge of God beyond the grace of Jaime and Maria Elena said before the meals they shared with me at the ranch. But I knew that God was good. I never raised my faith with the Hobsons, knowing they would disparage it and soil it. It was essential to keep it private without ritual or a building in which to gather and worship. I've traveled my life with a great deal of hardship, but also with a great deal of good fortune and a sustaining faith in a power beyond my own understanding. As I struggled to survive, my faith helped me find the way up the heavily occluded steps towards a full and loving life. I've recognized this divine presence in moments of great joy, such as my marriage to Catherine, the return to my family, and the birth of my children. In my lowest troubled moments, a hand of destiny seemed to guide me through and allow me to survive. When I accepted Judaism into my life, my faith found a home. This is now the source and expression of my belief. And that is how I see my relationship to God.
Antonio Salazar-Hobson, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Antonio, we know you, and I now know you, and more people will know you as a man of hope and faith and deep inspiration and motivation, not just to your family, but to the community at large. Congratulations on your memoir. And I do have one final question. When the book comes out, will you come back?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. At your pleasure. I'd be happy to do that.
Great.
All right.
Thank you so much for being here. Congratulations. And we
All
look
right.
forward to, let's get that beautiful book cover. Antonio, We Know You, written by Antonio Salazar-Hobson, be coming out March 2022. So that
All right.
is a wrap, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us here at Zoomcatchers Behind the Screen. I'm Kimberly Gunn, your host. We will see you next time.